All right, everyone, welcome to the October 19th, 2020 regular meeting of the Maritime Advisory Board. My name is Terry Lomax. I'm the chair. I'll just go around my screen in the order that they're on my screen. We have Beth Bellis from the Harbor Master's Office. We have Mike Tomasini, a member of the board. We have Duncan Hood, a member of the board. Eric Lashinsky, who is Chief of Comprehensive Planning for the City of Annapolis. Frida Wilding, member of the board. Eileen Fogarty is chair of the Maritime Task Force. Peter Trogdon, member of the board. Debbie Goslin, member of the board. Stephen Rice, Office of Economic Development, if I remember. I don't know what your title is sometimes. Alderman Arnett and Josh Durant from the COA TV. And Kimberly Consoli, who is our recorder, reporter, and minute taker. So with that, I promised Eric and Eileen that I would, and as I usually do, take our guests first. What I want to do is preface for their benefit that what I sent everyone on the board this morning. Eric provided me the link to the all of the legislation 02521 and the various amendments and proposed amendments. And in addition, I had been to the council meeting, as had, I think, Mike about a month ago, and I have been to the 2 Rules and City Government Committee meetings, and there's a third and hopefully final one coming up on Thursday. The package that I sent you for Eric and Eileen's benefit, I broke down into 4 categories. The first category was the 02521 on first reader. That everyone had already gotten, and that was just simply the first reader. The second category were proposed amendments 1 through 9, and I described those as the staff and planning commission amendments. And to back up, I described 02521 as the legislation that arose out of and was consistent with implementing the Maritime Task Force recommendations. The I'll call them the Planning Commission and Staff amendments 1 through 9. I generally described as the Technical and Planning Commission recommendations, again consistent with the Maritime Task Force recommendations. I noted that the Rules City Government Committee had recommended most of those favorably, and there were 2, I believe it was Amendment 2 and Amendment 9, that Alderman Arnett had tweaks to, and that he has either brought up or is bringing up, and had explained to the Rules Committee what he was going to do, again consistent with the recommendations made in the Maritime Task Force. The third set, the sort of category that I described were amendments 10 and 11 and 16 and 17, which were Alderman Arnett's amendments, which again, they were basically amendments to some of the amendments 1 through 9. And the last 2 of those, 16 and 17, are up for Rules Committee consideration on Thursday. Looking at what those amendments do, I would hope that they appear to be consistent with the Maritime Task Force recommendations, but the Rules Committee has not yet acted. And last but not least, Alderman Schandelmeyer had proposed 4 amendments, which were recommended unfavorably by the Rules and City Government Committee, primarily because it was felt, and I agree with it, but you all have them to read for yourselves, that they were inconsistent with the Maritime Task Force recommendations and would basically undermine the existing maritime zoning, even as it might be amended by 02521. And the Rules and City Government Committee recommended unfavorable on those. So with that background, I will let Eric and Eileen address sort of where we are, what's the thinking on the various amendments or packages, and then if the members of the board have any questions, we'll take questions. And then, as I indicated, it is incumbent upon us to vote as to our recommendations as to those, as to the legislation as may or may not be amended.
Okay, Eileen, I'll go ahead and share those few slides, I guess, to start. Bear with me for a sec. All right. Hopefully everybody can see the screen here. So just overview here. We talk about 02521, the ordinance, that's the big topic tonight, and its amendments. It's one of 3 tools that came out of the task force recommendations. The other 2 are the Annapolis Maritime Industry Fund and the Public Water Access Plan, and both of those are advancing right now. And so the zoning legislation is the one we're talking about tonight, but we can answer any questions about the others. Just in terms of what this legislation is trying to do, the emphasis is, and this is basically what came out of the task force in terms of they're thinking about how to sustain the maritime zones, it has strengthened the industry. Those were the two big goals of the task force. The emphasis is on the land intensive uses, the large working yards, the hub, the core of our maritime hub here in Annapolis, preserving those places to ensure that Annapolis continues to be a hub for the region and the East Coast. So a lot of what you see in the legislation is aimed at those sites. The triggers that were in the original legislation back in '87 are generally preserved. And so the task force felt that those are the things that really define those land intensive uses, the 20,000 square foot working yard, the 30-ton boat lift, the 25,000 square foot boat storage on land. There's a lot of interest in trying to find the right flexibility for the zones to allow these sites to be competitive. And so that's where non-maritime comes into play, and 15% is sort of came out to be the sort of the magic number in terms of not too much, not too little. The amount that people in the task force felt would provide that flexibility, that you not dilute the maritime character of the zones. And that is something that it's tied to the triggers in all of the 3 zones that we're talking about. The maritime zone conservation downtown is not really part of this discussion because it's generally resolved. And then compatible uses, restaurants, the primary use in that category was seen as something that would help the large industrial sites in the WMI, but needed to be tied to the working boat yard. So there was a lot of debate about how to advance the idea of restaurants to make these sites more competitive, but not have them negatively impact the working boat yards. So just real quickly, the idea behind the future, the Maritime Industry Fund and its programs, the idea here is to provide resources, to the industry to expand, retain, preserve businesses that are in the maritime zones and expand what's there today. And so this is more in Steve Rice's wheelhouse, but the idea here is that we create a fund that is that is funded through the non-maritime uses. That's essentially a fee tied to square foot allocations from the non-maritime uses, and that goes into this fund, and then we use that to build up our maritime base. There's a few other pieces to do that, but that's the essence of it. The public water access piece is really grounded in doing this public water access plan, which we've already started to advance with the National Park Service and a consultant as part of that. The idea here being we as a city have not done this until now, and it really kind of came to a head during the task force process. We recognize that there are opportunities or latent opportunities within the maritime zones that could expand public water access, but it's a citywide issue, and we really need to understand sort of the city opportunities. And what we did with the task force recommendations is sort of create a framework, and this is in the legislation, for enabling public-private investment in water access opportunities. And that comes into play with water access incentives that we'll talk about further. But the idea being there are things that property owners can do to expand water access, and they should be rewarded for that through greater flexibility. And so there's a hierarchy of improved water access investments that they get credit for. And we clarified what public access means, and that any new restaurant will be required to have that public access. This slide is not new to you all. We have this in here for the other meetings, Rules Committee, just to kind of clarify what we're the essence of the different districts. But when we get into talking about the amendments, you'll find maybe Terry's comments made this clear, but the amendments 1 through 9, the Tierney-Buckley amendments, those really aimed at pick up the Planning Commission's recommendations. And most of these are clarifications, technical clarifications, things that could be that improve the clarity of the intent of the legislation. This piece on the bottom here on this slide increased the cap for public water access incentives from 5% to 10%. That came from the Planning Commission, but that was not favored by the Rules and City Government Committee. But I understand Alderman Arnett's newest amendments might be addressing that. And the compliance and enforcement, this piece is pretty critical. I mean, it basically gives comfort to those folks who are worried that we might go another 35 years without addressing our maritime zones. So it formalizes a process for regular review and essentially measuring the success of the changes that we're making. And then finally, to the extent that we are allowing additional non-maritime uses, we provided some more clarity in those Tierney-Buckley amendments to what exactly we mean within the additional non-maritime. You're still not able to build within that 100-foot buffer. We clarified when we measure the gross floor area to calculate additional non-maritime, we're using, in most cases, the date of the original ordinance in 1987, what was built then, what existed then, and really, one of the main goals is to sort of not include the non-conforming uses that might exist today as part of that. So, Eileen, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
I think you covered most of it, Eric. The short version for the advisory board is that we strongly endorse the ordinance 02521. Again, it is focused on really ensuring that we keep our maritime hubs, our land intensive boat yards, on land boat storage, We support the amendments, the Buckley and Tierney amendments, which include all the amendments that Eric just went over. From what I have seen, we will be endorsing Alderman Arnett's modifications for 2 and 9, which are about water access and further expanding the opportunities for water access. They are completely consistent from what we have seen. We are tentatively endorsing Alderman Arnett's amendments 16 and 17. There were additional amendments 12, 13, 14, and 15 that the staff, me on behalf of the task force, have been strongly opposed to. Those amendments essentially eliminate or greatly reduce the triggers. Right now, a working boatyard of 20,000 square feet with a 30-ton lift is one trigger. 25,000 square feet of a on-land boat storage. And the reason behind this in the original ordinance, as in today's maritime strategy, is because these large land-intensive sites are always what is at threat. They have always been would be the first to go, because it would certainly be much easier to put office buildings or other uses on those sites. But more importantly, the boatyards, and I went through the employment today with a few of the owners, and those boatyards, separate from the people working for the yard, they employ between 75 and 90 small maritime trade businesses. That's where those jobs are. So we're not just looking at the yards, we're looking at the yards as a center. We call it the Mid-Atlantic Center for providing all the services. And within the city, they provide, they really are the hub for the maritime trades. The amendments 12, 13, 14, and 15 would reduce that requirement from 20 and 25,000 square feet to 5,000 square feet, which would, the thought behind it was that maybe it would pick up a couple of the smaller sites. It picks up, we believe, 2, the way it's written. But what it does, it enables the boatyards to eliminate 75 to 80%, depending on their specific size, of the working yard, and to certainly seriously jeopardize all of those trade jobs associated. My understanding is, I have not had confirmation, but my understanding is the alderman is withdrawing 12, 13, and 15, and that the amendment that he's keeping is an amendment related to restaurants in the WME. And that amendment, he has indicated to us that he will keep the existing triggers. In other words, the triggers for 20,000 square foot boatyard with a 30-ton lift and 25,000 square on-land boat storage and fuel docks. That if he keeps the existing triggers, the amendment would then allow in WME the opportunity through conditional use for, and basically it would be 2 sites. It would be SAYC, and it would be Dan Roach's site, which used to be a Bert Jabin boatyard in WME, to apply for a 4,000 square foot restaurant. So that is the piece that is remaining. The task force debated this issue, and as representing the task force, if something is part of the discussion, part of the debate, even if the task force came down on another side, that debate was a fairly close debate, but the task force wound up recommending against 4,000 square feet but for 2,000. But that discussion is certainly well within the focus of what the adopted plan and Maritime Task Force strategy is. So our understanding is that will be going forward. Our understanding is also that there will be an amendment. And I don't know whether Alderman Arnett and Alderwoman Finlayson have resolved all of this, but I know there is interest in an amendment that requests that in the next 6 months after adoption, that there be an evaluation of some of the smaller sites that to see if there are aspects of those smaller sites that are significant contributions to the industry and if they should be considered for triggers. So plus the other thing that I think is worth mentioning, there was discussion throughout the task force about the water access and whether it would apply to all properties or apply just to the properties with the triggers. Ultimately, that was included in the ordinance as applying to all properties. So some of these smaller sites that are waterfront will certainly have the opportunity to apply for the up to 10% water access if they deem it appropriate for their property. So, so that's where we are.
So Eileen, and Eric, thank you. When you talk about the incentives, I think it needs to be, and because it took me a while to understand the concept. So am I correct that the triggers allow a particular use? For example, a certain trigger will allow a certain base percentage of non-maritime in existing buildings, or a trigger may allow a certain restaurant of a certain size currently, depending upon the zone?
So the triggers are basically the large land intensive uses, 20,000 square foot yard plus the 30-ton lift, 25,000 square feet on land boat storage, what do I want to say, a fuel dock. Eric, we have seafood processing, which nobody really has. And what is
the yacht and sailing club? That also, it's a, essentially.
Yeah, but that's a pretty limited definition.
Yeah.
So those are the triggers. With those triggers, what the maritime strategy recommended is that a property owner retaining or providing these very important triggers may also get an additional 15% of flexibility of non-maritime. That 15% is not 15% of the land area, it's of the building. So I'll use Jabin's yard. Let's say he has 18 to 20 acres, but with his buildings, maybe he has 12,000 square feet, and 15% would be around 3,000 square feet. Other than the city marina, the 15% is not a high number because most of these sites are more land intensive. The city marina has 75,000 square feet, so 15% I think is somewhere over 11,000. But for the rest of the sites, it's a pretty de minimis number. And the idea was to keep these uses that are critical to the industry, like a fuel dock, like a working yard, the city is offering a slight incentive to create some flexibility. So that's the one incentive, and that's across all the districts. The other incentive is there was a great deal of discussion about water access. Water access is basically an opportunity to walk along the waterfront, opportunity to have boats or paddle boards immediately adjacent to the waterfront. There are two categories. There is the category of the smaller water access opportunities that are easier to provide. And then the larger opportunities called category 2, And that would be, Eric, how have you and Ross wound up with that? That would be a boating, community boating facility. Do we still have a street end park? And it would be 150 parking spaces for the community. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And so those, all of those, so you have 15% flexibility now with the triggers. You now get what was going to be an additional 5% if you provide some of these water access opportunities. But remember, most boatyards are not going to want people walking across their property, you know, under their lifts and dodging and weaving with their ice cream cones. So some will take the opportunity, but many will not. It's just not compatible with their core mission. So there now is, I believe in Alderman Ornette's amendments, there's an opportunity to get up to an additional 10% for providing some combination of these amenities. 10% if it's one of the very significant ones, and I think up to 5% if it's things like, you still have water taxi in there, don't you, Ross? You know, water taxi and the walkway and, you know, the boating facilities like paddle boards. Duncan?
Yeah, hey, Eileen, are you talking about 10% on top of the 15?
Correct,
Thank you.
correct.
And to, I think, because I had this question for Eileen before, so the triggers are basically limited to those large land intensive properties that have the 25,000 square feet for storage, that have a 30-ton lift, that et cetera. The incentives, which are the additional 5 or 10% on top of the 15%, are available to any property. It doesn't even necessarily have to be waterfront, although not what I don't envision Debbie doing a water taxi stop on a non-waterfront property, but there are other incentives that could apply to the non-waterfront properties. And those are the smaller properties, predominantly more so in Eastport than in WMI, that would be addressed in the second, I call it the second round. Eric, what is the, I believe there's in one of the, it might be in the original legislation or maybe one of the amendments, isn't there a date by which the first study has to take place and then it has to be what, every 4 years?
Yeah. Let me share let me share my screen again, because it's the First Amendment in
So it's annually, and then there has to be a full evaluation. It's
annual reporting, and then an
So if
evaluation.
you look
I
at,
thought it was December of 22 or 23, and every 4 years thereafter.
commencing December of 23.
Okay.
yeah, this is the key item on Amendment 1, number 5, this paragraph here, from the Tierney-Buckley amendments.
Okay. And the other, so the other thing that I want clear on the record of, these additional non-maritime uses, except perhaps a freestanding restaurant, those would all be must be inside existing buildings, correct? I mean, you can't build a new office building.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
That's correct.
So they would just be inside, and the general public wouldn't detract from what the look of the yard is, the ambiance of the yard, big or small.
And the other amendment, which my understanding is coming forward, would require that within 6 months, the issue of, and there are not many, there are a couple of smaller sites, but that the issue of the smaller sites be addressed. For example, something like a sail loft or something like that, a use that provides real benefit to the industry should on those smaller sites, should some of those uses that are critical to the industry be considered for incentives as well. And that we will be required to return in 6 months from date of adoption, which will be, we hope, Monday evening.
And those would, will those include not only the smaller sites, yards, for example, I guess it's still called Muller Marine size yard, that would address that, but would it also
Well,
be able
like
to
Peter's
address?
site, Duncan, where is your site?
I'm over at the end of Bemby Beach, right after Jabin's.
Yeah, but how large are you?
You know,
Duncan's in Port Annapolis.
It's Port Annapolis. It's pretty big.
Okay, so yeah, not yours. So
No,
Peter's
but-
site would be included, Scott's former site, all of the smaller sites.
Well, that was my point, was that it is the intent, I hope, is to address essentially any of the sites, whether they be waterfront or non-waterfront, in the WM zones that were not picked up in this broader legislation.
That is the intent. But remember, the guide will be, and some sites will be easier than others. The guide will be, for example, if you had a marina that doesn't have any boat yard or any kind of things that are really contribute to the industry, there may not be incentives for that. Something like Weaves and Platt, you could probably make, a case that those uses are critical to the industry. So that's what the evaluation will be.
Right.
Uses that really contribute to the health of the industry.
And those uses would then result in an incentive to allow a certain small percentage or a percentage of non-maritime use in conjunction with those uses?
Yes, but remember, even on the large sites, these incentives are de minimis. I mean, they're small. So if you had, let's say, if you have a 10,000 square foot building, what would 15% of that be?
That
So
1,000.
you're not looking at large numbers on the small sites, but you're looking at an issue of equity to recognize the contributions to the health of the industry. That sounded good, didn't it?
You ought to record that.
Yeah, let's use that.
Right. I think those are the only things I had. Duncan has his hand up, so Duncan, go.
So just to try and hash back what you said a minute ago, Eileen, if a particular yard meets this number, which allows them the 15% use of the square footage, they may not put up an additional structure for this 15% use. They need to use what is existing now.
Correct. Now, what, of course, somebody could do is they could put up an additional structure, put some of their, maritime uses into that, and then use some of the existing structures. So there's always where there's a will, there's a way.
Right. Okay.
But the intent was not, the real focus of this whole concept 34 years ago through today is to keep those large land intensive uses. Without them, we lose to Kent Narrows. And so the intent is not to encourage people to build new buildings. It's to encourage people to subsidize, what they have. In
Good.
this case, their working yards.
Thanks, Eileen.
I see Ross nodding in agreement.
No, and going around my screen, at least, we'll go next to Scott, who has his hand up.
Yeah, Eileen, just a hypothetical question. On my old property, it had one story. Could someone go up to the max, which I think would be at least one more or two more stories up, and not build out, but just build up and then
That
get the
would be,
exemptions?
Scott, that would be, you probably volunteered yourself for this next group. That would be a point of discussion. Because
So
nobody.
it may not be harmful, but it's not developed
Right.
all the
That
way up,
would
and there's
certainly
others like
be
that.
a good point of discussion.
Like Peter's old property or present property, Williams and Plath, the same thing. It's one story, but I think the limit's 35 feet, whatever it is there. So
let's-
instead of going out,
let's
just go up.
Use your old property. How large was that structure?
10,500, and the foot out of a 19,500, something like that, property.
So the way the ordinance reads today, and I would assume this aspect of it would continue, is your non-maritime flexibility would be based on what you have on the date of adoption. So what that would mean is there would be nothing stopping you from building a second floor. However, you wouldn't be able to calculate that into getting more non-maritime. You
Yeah,
could put your non-maritime up there, but your base would be 10,500 rather than 21,000.
yeah,
But-
because
but that is
theoretically, if
some-
somebody went 3 stories,
would-
they could be 30,000.
That
Yeah,
would be something that would, Scott, I'm glad you raised that because it brings up an interesting way. If in fact you are able, if an amendment, if a subsequent legislation were to include the fact that, yes, you could build a second story and your GFA, gross floor area, could include that for these smaller sites, then you get 10% on 20,000 instead of 10% on 10,000. So
But I
that's
would
certainly
say-
something to take up. That's certainly something that would be a reasonable thing to take up, on in round 2.
but to make sure we don't create unrealistic expectations, at least with the larger sites, there was strong opposition to that. And the reasoning, but it would be different. You would have a different situation with Weems and Plath or with your building because you would not be using up a working yard. You would be basically building upon an existing structure. The opposition and the clear language in the ordinance that you can only count your base based on the date of adoption was that the intent was to not have people using up their working yard to build new buildings. So that would be something that could be discussed because it is a little bit different situation.
Yeah, because you could give incentive to somebody to build upwards instead of outwards and get more non-maritime accidentally.
You just had a crumb landed.
But then you'd have to provide the parking.
That's the other part of it. Yeah.
I was going to say, there's going to be a whole Pandora's box of, or as I refer to it, a whole whack-a-mole selection as to what else comes into play. Debbie,
Yeah,
you're
you just have to
going
watch
around
that.
on my screen. Is there anything you want to ask or say?
I have one more thing.
Oh, okay, never mind. Back to
Go ahead.
Scott.
A colleague of mine brought up this afternoon, in the 025, that talks about the definitions, and it encouraged sail manufacturing and canvas manufacturing in there, but it didn't define if you could sell the product. And I was reading through it. It looks like it might be covered under marine retail, but it says you can manufacture sails and you can manufacture canvas, but it doesn't say you can sell it.
So
Well-
this is an interesting discussion because, and Mr. Lomax is partly responsible for this. Mr. Lomax and Dr. Nash wanted to combine and simplify the code. So I will go back and make sure that it is clear that by doing these combinations, that obviously, I think it would be because that's clearly a maritime use, but
You'd think, yeah, just might want to define
Yeah.
it more clearly because, for instance, the north operation has a loft in one building and the sales office in the other. So
Right.
the way it's defined is you could have the loft, but you couldn't sell the sales. But just something to clear that up.
Yeah.
To me, it's understandable, and also well, I forget the number, but it talks about marine retail. I would think it would be covered under marine
it
retail.
would
as
cover,
well.
should come under marine.
I mean, that's where it would, and I think there's even a more catch-all phrase in just marine retail. I was trying to look it up, but those kind of provisions were not decreased in how they read. All they
Yeah.
did was there were anomalies such as you could have a loft in WMI, but not WME, but in WMA, those were those kinds of inconsistencies. If it's a maritime use, it ought to be available basically in any
You
maritime.
think? Yeah, it wasn't my question. It was just somebody asked me.
Yeah, good
to ask.
question.
So I might just want to take a look at that, see where it falls in, if it's
Okay.
simpler to combine them
Eric, do you
together.
have that?
I was looking for it. I don't have it. It's in
No,
the table.
no,
It's in the
that's-
Just
table.
to
of
make
uses.
sure Eric follows up on
Yeah.
it.
Here, that's a good pickup. I was just looking at it. It would fall under the maritime retail, and it appears that it is, even though it's you could infer that it's there. It's not spelled out, specifically.
I mean,
So
marine retail is the display, sale, and storage of marine parts, supplies, accessories, and provision of other goods, including but not limited to. And then there's a variety of things. But so I wouldn't expect planning and zoning to say that you can make a sale but not sell a sale.
Yeah.
right.
In
Yeah,
fact, I don't
historically,
think-
when you say sell off, it's selling and manufacturing. Same with canvas shops
Yeah.
as well, but it might be worth clarifying that
Yeah,
somewhere somehow.
those definitions were combined, and so the table of uses was simplified by making the definitions in the code as opposed to every little item in the table of uses. That's what happened there. Anything else,
Thank you.
Scott?
That's all. Thank you.
Debbie?
I am glad that Scott mentioned the sailmaker issue too, because in the trade, we all know that people who sell sails are called sailmakers. I mean, that we call them that, and they're treated that way by, by what is it now called, ISAF or World Sailing and our national bodies.
International, yes. ISAB is
Make sure
international.
that, we want to make sure that sailmakers aren't excluded, because it looks like they specifically are excluded the way that amendment is written. And my question is about the fund. I mean, the idea of the 15% and other incentives is to provide relief for the landlords. And if using that relief, the cost is sufficiently high, then you may lose the benefit of that relief. So what are the thoughts about the fund and how it's calculated?
Let me make a couple of comments and I'll give this to Stephen. Stephen was trying to pull together a meeting this week, and it will probably be another week or so. But the meeting will include several of the property owners as well as some people from the industry, just to balance it. The numbers thrown out early on, and this was by two of the larger property owners, the City Marina, Gary Gill, and Cardi Templeton. They were throwing out, they were not offering these numbers up, but they were saying, they made statements in public hearing that something like $1 a square foot is something they could work with, but they certainly couldn't work with, getting this additional use and then being expected to contribute $4 or $5 or $10 a square foot. So their starting number, I guess, is $1 a square foot. Of course, the industry people will probably look for a little more, but Stephen is going to get a group together, and I will join with Stephen. Stephen, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I would just say that we don't have a hard and fast formula yet, but after we have a chance to meet with the property owners and hear everyone out, we'll run some simulations and do some forecasting and so forth, and we'll be in a better position.
I'm a property owner too, and I'd love to participate in that conversation.
Sure. And we've got very strong, forceful property owners. We're going to also try and include a few people representing the industry, just, to make sure that because the interest is in getting some revenue, but the overall objective here was to subsidize the larger sites. The objective was not to subsidize them and then screw them. That was not the objective. So you can quote me on subsidize, don't screw.
It almost seems that it needs to be a percentage, because as values change and prices change, it's at a fixed amount, you're going to be revisiting it every year. So if there's a percentage that can be concluded upon, that it works well for everybody, then you don't have to go back and revisit it every year as inflation changes and rents change.
And I just don't really like the thought that the city is subsidizing the landowner. The landowners have been subsidizing the maritime industry since this started, and this is providing some relief, but I don't think that it is subsidizing the landowner. I just want to make that statement.
Incentivizing would be a better word, incentivizing.
Yeah.
All right.
Agree.
Peter? Oops. Scott, back to you.
I
again.
just think, I just say, I agree with Debbie. Yeah.
Peter, you're next on my screen.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. Working my way down along the bottom, I have Andy. Good evening.
Yes, sorry to be late in joining.
It's okay.
I've been listening by phone for a little while and just paying attention. Nothing to comment.
Mike? Frida?
One thing that stuck out to me in reading the amendments today and everything was the enforcement that planning and zoning will be performing. And does this mean they're going to hire another person to strictly do the enforcement on this, or will existing staff be used? Thank you.
So there are a couple answers to that. First of all, it's structured so that the onus is more on the property owner, because there'll be a requirement every year for all of the property owners in order for their use permits to be whatever continued, to submit a list of who their tenants are and what their square footage is. That goes to the planning department, and then it goes to the planning commission and the Maritime Advisory Board. And the reason for that is that, there's an expression, I can't think of it, but sunshine is a great cleanser, something to that effect. The idea is this will be very public, and if there's someone hasn't done it, rather than having to send someone out and enforce, basically the use permits are rescinded. I mean, it's a strong incentive. So we structured it to make as little enforcement by foot necessary to create a structure where if you don't do it, your use permits get rescinded, and it's done really in a very public setting before your board and the planning commission. So
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else, Frida? Scott, for some reason you moved around the screen and now you're next again. I think it's because you put your screen on, when you undo, when you turn off your screen, it moves your square to a different location. So do you have anything else? Because
Nothing else. No, I didn't move it on purpose. On my screen,
Okay.
it's staying in the same place, so I have no clue. But-
So, all right. Well, I thank everybody for the various questions and conversation, because I think it really did help clarify, at least in my mind, some of the points that are more, I won't say obscure, but are less in the forefront in this actually very extensive legislation. Eric, one thing for you, I have a question which really goes to the comprehensive plan, which is in the process. The MAB has sent in some recommendations, some of which have now been subsumed in this legislation, but I would like to revisit with you before we get much farther down in the comprehensive plan, as the language in the comprehensive plan, so that as we move forward, I'm assuming we'll have to be basically operating when we do the next review under the new comprehensive plan. And so we probably need to make sure that the language in the comprehensive plan, the 2020, whatever it's going to be, comprehensive plan lines up with the strategy that's been adopted, because the old plan and the strategy will become moot with the new plan, and they probably should have some alignment so that we can move forward under the strategy, even under the new comprehensive plan.
Yeah, it'd be good to meet Terry. I think I can't recall off the top of my head, the extent of the recommendations you shared previously, but I want to make sure that they're picked up in our draft and the plan was always with the recommendations coming out of this task force that not only would the task force strategy document be part of the appendix to the comprehensive plan, but the recommendations go into some of the chapters that apply. That we have a chapter on municipal growth. We have a chapter on land use and the items, and we also have a chapter on community facilities. So the water access recommendations apply there. So a lot of what came out of the task force cuts. These are kind of cross-cutting issues. They're not just they don't work in isolation really. So
Well, and my only concern is that that the language in the comprehensive plan be broad enough to include going forward with the task force strategy in the next comprehensive plan, as well as the planning commission recommendations about water access, et cetera, not have a challenge to something that might be enacted or done under the new comprehensive plan, a challenge being that it was inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. That's all.
Gotcha.
All right. So that basically brings us to, and I've been struggling with how to structure. What we have is actually, let me ask Alderman Arnett, because can you, and we have I think I have the most current Amendment 17. Amendment 16, I think, if my recollection serves me, it was just clarifying the definition of public water access, I believe. And that was fairly straightforward.
Right.
But I'm looking at, for Amendment 17, it included some of the language. Am I correct that it includes some of the language in terms of the definition of waterfront access and public water access as part of some definitions in 17, but also tweaks, I'll call it tweaks the incentives. Am I correct with that?
That is correct.
Okay, because it's kind of an odd, we have certain amendments that we can refer to as being consistent with the recommendations of the Rules City Government Committee. And then we have these two or three amendments that are still out there that we can't, and I at least want to capture the two that we have, yours and the other, that they are to see whether or not this board will support those, even though they haven't passed through the Rules Committee yet. That's all. So with all of that in mind, I think the appropriate motion following the Rules Committee recommendations is a motion to recommend favorably O2521 with those amendments 1 through 9, which received favorable recommendation from the Planning Commission, and to include Alderman Arnett's amendments 16 and 17. And I think that captures the three categories that have had favorable recommendations, and to recommend unfavorably amendments 12, 13, 14, and 15, although I will ask Alderman Arnett about 14, which...
And Terry, you might also want to just clarify that you are rules recommended 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And Alderman Arnett's amendments replace 2 and 9.
Correct. Good, the good point. We'll clarify that. So 16 and 17 replace 2 and 9. All right. But Alderman Schandelmeyer's amendment number 14, as I read it, the primary focus of amendment 14 is to make a restaurant use of 4,000 square feet applicable to the WME, whereas now it is just applicable to WMI and WMM, and only 2,000 square feet is applicable to WME. And his amendment would make.
Correct. I haven't, do you have what I don't know, because I haven't seen the version, did they take out all of the reduction of triggers? Is it just about the restaurant?
No,
Still have the current one, which is, it still has the revised triggers as the first part of it, which
all right, then we would. then
That
we-
hasn't come out.
All right,
not
so 14 as recommended still as the planning commission recommended unfavorable.
Yes, because if that's the case, now, the alderman said that he would be revising that, but if that's the case, the triggers, I'm sure Ross's constituency would enjoy this, the triggers would basically allow most of the sites in Eastport to qualify if they haven't gone back to the original triggers.
And it would increase the restaurant size from 2,000 to 4,000.
Right.
So as it stands before this board, 14 would be inconsistent with the task force recommendations, and it would be, as it stands right now, was recommended unfavorably by rules and city government.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Duncan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Terry, excuse me. Eileen, didn't you tell me that Alderman Schandelmeyer was going to withdraw? I'm doing this from memory, something like
He's
withdraw all except 15?
all except 14.
14,
But what he also said is that with 14, he would be eliminating the language that reduces all the triggers. He would be keeping the existing language, but I'm looking at Eric. Evidently, we don't have that yet submitted. Is that correct?
Yeah, not on the city council legislation website, which is where all the most current amendments would reside.
And
So it's
Ross,
still-
do you have a copy of it?
No, I don't. And not only that, the proper procedure would be, particularly since he's ostensibly amending away half of it, he would have to submit a new amendment. So it would be amendment 18 or 19, whichever. And we'll have to get that to us by 3:00 Thursday when the Rules Committee meets to take this all up. But Terry is correct. The Rules Committee voted unfavorably to Amendment 14, 12 through 14.
All right, so with the clarification that Eric gave me, what I
And
see.
15, unfavorably on 15 as well.
Well,
No,
correct?
we did not get to 15.
Okay.
So that is still live before the Rules Committee. But I think it will be voted down.
Okay, so, and one way or the other, well, go ahead, Debbie.
I'm sorry if I have missed this completely, but Ross's Amendment 10, where it says to unstrike the language stricken, those are all the different maritime uses. Why were those stricken in the first place?
That is what I will put. I lost that argument with Dr. Nash and Mr. Lomax Esquire. I did not think it should be stricken, but that's because I like detail. I think Mr. Lomax and Dr. Nash felt that it was unwieldy and that they should, have a tighter version because they felt it was unnecessary to have all that detail. Is that correct, Terry?
I don't remember having any discussion about, Amendment 10, unstrike the language. Amendments.
All the
pages-
uses were stricken, and I think that going to the more
But I
generalized
think-
categories.
But I
They all
think,
moved to the definitions, the section that deals with terms. So that's really, we've had to clarify that they didn't get deleted. They just sort of got pushed into the definitions section to make for a more clear use table. That was the intent there, I think. But
If I might, Mr. Chair.
absolutely, it's your amendment.
Well, so the discussion I had primarily with Terry was along the lines of striking the detail because we're treating all of the maritime districts the same. But that doesn't seem to me to square with what the task force said, which is it recognizes that each of the maritime districts has its own unique qualities. But my other reason for wanting to leave that in is it makes it different not only from the rest of the use tables that have all of these useful details, but it even makes it different from this section, category B, which is the other maritime uses, which keeps in all the detail. Now, when Terry and I did have a very intensive work on this, and there are some things in the details across different districts that don't make sense either in terms of why is it only a special exception in this district and not in the other two, or why isn't it some other thing? There were a handful of those, but I agree with Eileen that I like that detail. You can't always rely on people being able to go over to the definitions and make that crosswalk. And I guess I'm also a person that likes to be able to just look at a table and know everything that's there instead of flipping back and forth. However, the Rules Committee didn't see it that way. I lost that vote 1-2. And in the scheme of things, and that old adage, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm not going to, I'm not going to get in the way of that.
So,
Eileen, I recall when this first went through in the late 80s that you had a catch-all that said that the Director of Planning and Zoning could use some discretion in the use and whether or not it conformed with maritime. Is that anywhere in here or is that gone?
no,
Well,
that's
Terry?
it better still be there. That was not changed.
Yeah.
So,
I
so
think
the-
it's very important to have that language because there are things that no one can anticipate,
Right.
particularly as we change the nature of this business, this industry.
So I'm going to give, Ross, Alderman Arnett refreshed my recollection as to what we were talking about here. So the table of uses has all these categories, subcategories, subcategories, and 4 columns, WMM, WMI, WME, WMC. And I'm just looking at on-land boat storage. So in the current code, on-land boat storage, which are open areas, paved or unpaved, and structures providing for on-land boat and marine equipment storage and display, is permitted in 1 zone, not permitted in 2 zones, and is permitted subject to certain standards in the 4th zone. Now, it's about as basic to my mind, that's about as core a maritime use as you get, and yet there are 2 zones that can't do it. It defied logic.
Well, and my rejoinder to you, Terry, is why did that happen? Instead of just throwing it out and relying that somehow it's going to be picked up in the definitions, I would much prefer to go through the detail and amend it. There could have been reasons why they may be obviated by now, but to just throw it all out without even questioning why were the differences across districts there was something that I personally had I resisted that. But I do think it still bears some exploration as to why historically in different districts there were different kinds of prohibitions or allowing with special exception or whatever, for the very reason that you're citing, that, gee, why would you not allow it here and there? But, and they're really across, to be honest, across each of the subcategories, there are not a lot of differences. And mainly they are, some of them have to have special exception and some of them don't. But we did, when you and I were doing that work, we did come across some ones that were definitely head scratchers. I just wanted to pursue and maybe make amendments to those details rather than just pitching it all.
Well, it wasn't, so just to be clear, all those little subcategory definitions were not pitched. They were all collected into definitions of a particular category in the definitions section, and then in the, well,
Not by district. It's a
and then
generic,
the
all
they were
maritime.
generic. And I guess the first question I have, I'm confused as to what
I
amendment.
agree with Terry on that. I mean, all maritime uses should be allowed in all maritime districts. That makes sense to me.
At this point in time, it may make more sense. I'm just thinking of the narrowing window. You know, since we've got to look at other stuff, we could certainly look at this some more if we wanted, Ross. I'm just throwing that
That's
out.
gonna be, if you think this go around was tedious. But let me.
You've made a great explanation. I really appreciate it. And now the changes make sense. So thank you.
So let me, Eric and the Alderman, let me understand, what is 10 doing? It's unstriking a strike. So if that amendment is approved, then the current, I'll call it my amendment of the use table stands. Is that what the effect of that is?
The effect is that the use table would stay as it is. It would not have all those strikeouts.
All right. And
you would have the detail in the use table and in the definitions, which I think is a very useful redundancy. But I agree with Eileen. Our window is getting down to a needle point, and there's many more important things. And we can always come back and revisit it. Remember, we're not doing this and then wait 34 more years to get to it. If we find out we lost something by taking that detail out, we can go back and talk about what we lost and maybe put some of it back in. I'll tell you, there's another thing I'm resisting here, which is there is a general move by the Office of Law to take all of the detail out of the use tables across all use table categories, and in fact, take much of the detail out of all of Title 21 and most of the other legislation, and leave it to the departments to promulgate new rules that would get into that sub detail. And I am very resistant to that. This is a minor point in the big scheme of 02521, and I certainly don't want to hold us up on it any longer.
So Eric, or whoever knows the answer. So Amendment 10 was recommended unfavorably by the Rules Committee.
Right.
And amendment, did Amendment 11, I don't remember what happened with 11.
They did agree to 11.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think 11 was fine.
So it was 11 favorable.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
so if I have this right, the Rules Committee recommendations favorably as to 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, and 16 and 17 have not been heard, but they would replace 2 and 9.
Correct.
Unfavorable was 10, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Not 15. We didn't
Oh, you didn't
rule on
get, you didn't
15.
get to 15, but, all right. So 15 is open. 16 and 17 are open. So 15, 16, and 17. All right. Then I think the best thing to do is to try to take this in three chunks. Is there a motion from this board to favorably recommend 02521 with amendments 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 16, and 17? To start with. We have that amendment.
Can we do that, Terry, if 16 and 17 haven't been considered by rules?
Well, they've been presented. We can take them out and make them part of a second motion might make more sense.
But I think the answer is yes, because this is an advisory body to the Rules Committee, but do whatever you're comfortable with. I'm certainly not going to.
I mean, whichever way you want to go, Mike. I mean, if you. So we'll go back to, is there a motion to recommend favorably 02521 with amendments 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, and 16 and 17?
I'm kind of coming down on Mike's side where if we don't know the rules committee's thoughts on 16 and 17,
Right.
I can support it. I would motion without those two.
All
But
right.
16 and 17 are replacements of earlier amendments that are now fixed. Is that right?
Right. And we can just take them up as a separate motion along with 15, which has not been considered either by the, we'll just take that as a separate motion. So is there a motion to approve 02521 as amended by amendments 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 11?
I'll give you that.
All right. Is there a second? Mr. Allen has seconded. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor of that motion? Aye. 2, 3. Let me do a head count here. We got Kimberly, have you got that? We have one. The hands up are myself, Mr. Hood, Mr. Trogdon, Ms. Goslin, Ms. Wildy, Mr. Allen, Mr. Tomasini. Mr. Fagley, are you abstaining or a negative? You're on mute.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. And we have one abstention in Mr. Fagley. So Kimberly, for your purposes, that is that. The second motion, since we have 1, 2, 3, we have 4 recommendations, 4 amendments were recommended unfavorably out of the Rules Committee and have been considered. So is there a motion to recommend unfavorably amendments 10, 12, 13, and 14?
Well, you guys are making me do this, aren't you?
Well, somebody has to. I mean, I suppose I could.
Duh.
Mr. Hood has made a motion. Is there a second? Mr. Trogdon has seconded. Is there any further discussion?
Terry, can you just repeat the motion one time real quickly?
Motion is to recommend unfavorably amendments 10, 12, 13, and 14.
Yeah, these are the amendments that were not recommended by the rules.
And all of those were not recommended by the Rules Committee, and we've talked about what they were. But so with any other discussion? All right, so all up, Frida?
I have a question, maybe obvious to others, but what is the rush for us to vote on this without it having finished gone to all the committees in the planning commission?
Well,
It's gone to planning
they
commission.
have gone to the planning commission.
Or,
Legislature's gone to the planning commission twice. The real push on this is that on October 27th, the current council makeup will be holding its last council session on which this can be voted. If something is not adopted in whatever form on October 27th, the legislation dies what they call sine die. It is
okay.
done. It is done for this legislative session, and it must be reintroduced and start all over again sometime after the November, actually after everybody's sworn in on December. So
could additional amendments be presented at that meeting that we would have to then go back and vote on at a future date?
well, they could present more amendments, but if anything is sent back, whether it's the underlying legislation, amendments, or anything, and the legislation in some fashion does not pass, it dies, sine die. And that's been a problem because all of this has come up in basically, the last 12 months of an election year with a lot of work to be done. But any changes that don't get picked up here, just like 12, 13, 14, possibly 15, I understand number one would automatically be available for consideration under the December 23 deadline of having to review it. But if Alderman Finlayson proceeds with an amendment 19 to accelerate that time, then they would, we revisit it whenever that time frame is accelerated to. So I do not expect anything that is done to be the end of this for a while. I think there will be amendments. I mean, not amendments, but there'll be further recommendations, and some of these items, when the dust is settled and we see how it looks in practice, certainly that's why there's a review period. So, but it's the October 27th deadline is what's driving this.
Okay, thank you.
We could have a special MAB meeting on Friday night after the Rules Committee meets on Thursday, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen. So that's.
And we have a fish fry too.
A fish
There
fry.
you go.
So, but that's what's driving all of this. All right. Any other discussion? So that means all in favor of the second motion, which is to recommend unfavorable 10, 12, 13, and 14. Raise your hand so I can see. 1, 2. We have everyone except Mr. Fagley. And Mr. Fagley, are you abstaining?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Fagley abstains. All right. That brings us to the last 1, 2, 3. Last 3. So maybe we'll take them in 2 parts. So 15 has not been considered by the Rules Committee, but as Eileen had pointed out, it goes to increasing restaurant size. Well, right now, as it stands, it decreases the trigger and increases restaurant size in WM. It decreases the trigger in every zone and increases the restaurant size, which was contrary to the task force recommendations, the planning commission recommendations, staff recommendations. So I would entertain a motion to recommend unfavorably amendment 15. Duncan, you're the go-to guy in the upper left corner.
Absolutely.
Is there a second to recommend unfavorably on 15? Mr. Fagley, any further discussion? All right, all in favor of recommending unfavorably 15? And we have unanimous on that, Kimberly.
You heard it here.
And last but not least, we have 16 and 17. And those are Alderman Arnett's amendments that he's talked about that replace 2 and 9, which are not addressed. And let me ask you this, Eric. Well, never mind. So is there a motion to recommend favorably proposed amendments 16 and 17?
So move.
Okay, Ms. Wildy has moved that. Is there a second? Mr. Trogdon, second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Debbie, we have,
I'm abstaining on this one.
okay.
Terry, yeah, I have a question.
All right, we'll withdraw our hands for a minute.
There's a part of these amendments that makes a business like mine an incentive,
Correct.
and I'm not sure if that allows me to vote on
Oh,
it.
the simple thing is just abstain.
I think I'll abstain.
Okay, well, we have a quorum and you can
But
abstain.
thank you all for your support.
All right, again, all in favor? We have Mr. Hood, Mr. Lomax, Mr. Trogdon, Ms. Wildy, and Mr. Allen in favor, and we have Ms. Goslin. Andy, were you a favor or you're an abstain? You're mute, I can't hear you. You're a yes.
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Fagley is a yes. Mr. Tomasini and Ms. Goslin both abstain. All right, I think we have accomplished. Eileen, is there anything else we need to do? Boss, is there anything else we need to do? Besides, I'll go get a beer.
Well,
Just celebrate. Yeah.
I want to thank you, Eileen, that it's a big lift. Thank you.
Agreed. Eileen,
you.
excellent work.
And
And
Terry
Eric.
and Mike
Eric,
and Eric.
Thank you
Terry,
all.
Stephen,
Ross, you were about to opine.
Yes. A couple things. One, while they're called the Buckley Tierney amendments, I think we know that some of the people on the outer circumference of this viewing screen were really critical to that. Some of those people, Eileen and Terry, have spent numerous hours getting cauliflower ear on the phone with me. This has been very intensive, very rigorous. But to me, the most incredible advance is on the compliance and enforcement. And this is going to give us something we have not had, information we've never had before. And now we will. And now we're going to be able to go in and look at individual property owners, individual businesses, and understand what's happening to them and be able to do this, I think, in a much more enlightened way. And so I don't know whether it's escaped your notice or not, but I have not been a sponsor of this legislation. But with these changes, and assuming we get through rules on Thursday at City Council, I will ask to be a sponsor of this legislation. I think it's been improved tremendously with a lot of hard work. And I would just say to you, Debbie, the subsidy has been on the part of the landowners to some of the maritime businesses, not subsidizing the city. And we recognize that. And part of the reason for giving the flexibility is if you have empty spaces for whatever reason, that makes the subsidy of the maritime businesses that much tougher. And so the flexibility gives the ability for the landowners to be able to make our maritime services, which I personally, and I think we all desperately need, make that much more feasible. And even if the industry in some places is riding high now, we know it's very cyclical. So I think this is very forward-looking legislation that anticipates that not everything is going to be glorious in every time period and every economic environment. So I want to thank everybody, all the help that you've given me in understanding and fretting over this legislation. I want to thank you for all those efforts.
Well said, Ross.
Yeah, and Ross is correct that he and I have had a number of spirited discussions, and I have changed some of my thinking, and he has come around to accept some, I won't say he's changed his thinking, but he's come around to accept, as he puts it, don't let the what is it, the
Perfect.
the perfect stand in the way of progress. But and to that same vein, I had sent him the other day a quote from the Senate Majority Leader that and he was talking about the large budget brouhaha they're going through, that no piece of legislation ever pleases everybody. And this is just another example at a local level that you're always going to have a spirited debate over important legislation, but at least we've done something that has not been accomplished before the last 34 years. And I really give a lot of credit to Eileen and Eric for staying after this. This type of things can wear on staff where they just basically say, okay, whatever you want to do, go do it. But they have stayed true to the task force recommendations in terms of trying to keep this on track. And by the way, have done it all through this entire process took place during COVID-19. So that's quite an accomplishment. All right, that takes care of that. I'd like to just run through a couple of the other items. I don't want to keep everybody any later. Stay tuned to there's a rules committee that anybody's welcome to on Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock in council chambers. And then there is the council session on Monday, the 27th, starting at 7 o'clock in council chambers.
Monday, the 25th.
Or 25th, sorry, I'm losing days. I'm losing days every day.
Aren't we all?
So let me go to a simple mundane thing. Everybody has in front of them the minutes. And I had one, two, three changes that I picked up on page 2, Kimberly, the first sentence of the first full paragraph there, that in which you quote me as saying that the nuts and bolts of 025 will be deferred. Actually, what I was talking about was that if we don't do something, it will be deferred. So I would move to strike the first sentence and just start, down through the word because, and then just start with the rules committee has not taken up the issue yet, because that was where it stood last time. In the third full sentence or third full paragraph, Mr. Trogdon presented a question about whether the proposed changes go far enough instead of too far enough. And then in the last, under adjournment, this is just some typographical, it's Mr. Fagley without a capital R, and then you've had passed in there twice. Those are my changes. Does anybody else have any changes? If not, is there a motion to adopt the minutes with those changes? Mr. Thomasini has moved it. Ms. Goslin has seconded it. All in favor? Everybody, all in favor, Kimberly. So those, if you'll make those changes, if you have a question, just give me a call. We'll just defer the county MIAB. Mr. Rice is not here. Oh yeah, he is. Any economic, besides the entire 025-21, any more economic development update?
I'll be brief. I'll start off with the boat shows, and I'll defer any specifics to Mr. Trogdon. But by all reports, the boat shows were very successful, and I've been told that records were actually broken. So that's good to hear that the boat shows are back and that they're thriving, and that we can maintain our primacy as a maritime capital. Debbie, it looked like you wanted to say something. No? Okay. Also on the economic development front, we're doing pretty well. Our vacancy rate is 5.2%. We have 4 businesses during September and October who either were new to the city or expanded within the city. We had 2 ribbon cuttings in September. The businesses were Coupla and Rehab to Perform. Economic development supported 53 businesses last month. We were very busy. Of course, a lot of our focus was on the tornado impacted businesses. And we're happy that the Small Business Administration will be setting up a local office within the next few days. And also the state of Maryland's Department of Housing and Community Development will be providing assistance to impacted businesses as well. I'll have more information on that actually tomorrow, and we'll be sharing that with the impacted businesses in short order. Recovery zones will come to an end on November 1st. So we had a meeting with Public Works today, and I think we're at the point where we have a solid plan for reining in the recovery zones and reducing that outdoor footprint pretty significantly. So there's a lot happening on the economic development front, and but those are the highlights.
One thing, and I had heard, I had actually had been an undercurrent of discussion with my more beer aficionados, but I realized that RAR Brewing is relocating or is opening a location, the Old Mexican Cafe over in West Annapolis. Is there a time frame for that opening?
I don't have a time frame, but I can check on that and circle back.
No, I was just you don't have to circle back. It was just I saw it. There was a lot of among my beer aficionado friends. There's a lot of interest. Apparently, it's a good brewery out of Cambridge. So that'll be nice. It'd be nice to have yet another brew pub. Annapolis is taking on a different image.
The article in the Capitol hinted at a summer 2022 opening.
Okay.
Yeah. Having visited their location in Cambridge, welcome aboard.
Yeah, good. All right. We talked about the comprehensive plan, task force update. Debbie, anything quickly on the NDZ?
No update this month.
All right. Ashley, you've been very, very diligent about staying in. I hope that's because you have something to say and you just haven't forgot to turn off your computer.
No, I'm here. Unfortunately, I don't have much to say. Bird's house, we are down to the state. Everything is finalized, all the documents. The state is working on the signature process on its end, which is taking a little bit of time just because most of them are remote, but they actually need wet signatures. So they're sorting that out on their end. And then when they're done, they're going to give me a closing date. So we are slowly but surely getting to the finish line on that.
All right. And while I have you on the end, I saw that there is still a lawsuit out there with respect to Wells Cove.
Yes, I haven't looked at it personally. I know the city attorney is aware of it. I'm not sure, to be honest, how much more we can do at this point because they've given us the easement that is required, that was agreed to.
Right.
So any further action by us at this point would need to be a sort of a eminent domain sort of pathway. And I don't know if any decision has been made. Of course, third parties are always, welcome to bring lawsuits to challenge these things. But as far as from a city position, we have our easement. So I'm not sure if a court's going to give us much more at this point.
Okay. Peter, anything else you want to add on the or Debbie or anybody else that was at the boat show? We'll start with Peter. Anything else you want to add?
Well, I think I could say there's some supply chain issues that meant that many of the manufacturers who might bring, every model couldn't deliver all the boats that they wanted to bring, and our European and Canadian guests had travel restrictions, so we were missing those attendants, and they're certainly important to the success of those shows. But that attendance was very strong, and we were real happy It was a huge success, and we are very happy. But I just wanted to make those two comments.
I had to chuckle when I looked at I guess the day before and the Thursday of the boat show last week, and the market went up 1,000 points in 2 days. I suspect those that were inclined to want to buy a boat out of it for their retirement fund were like, oh, well, maybe I can buy one.
Maybe.
All right, anybody else have anything on the boat show? So the last thing is that I didn't put on, but it occurred to me because somebody was asking me about it. We have been doing virtual meetings. We can continue to do virtual meetings. We can also go back to live meetings and alternate. My intent would be to at least have the December meeting as our usual live meeting somewhere where off city property, but open, obviously, advertised and agended, but as a holiday party or a holiday meeting. But what's people's feeling? Does everybody prefer to stay virtual for the time being? Or do I try to make arrangements to go back live maybe in January? We'll start with Duncan.
Yeah, one of the things that has been good about meeting virtually is our ability to open this up to the public, as opposed to just showing a single table with a lot of talking heads. I think it makes it a lot more accessible to people. And much as I love you all, I think it's a great format to see each other and work the way we have been. So I'm kind of in favor of this.
Peter?
I'm in favor of the virtual meeting because I'm traveling so often. I can attend these meetings from when I'm on the road. So I would have missed several meetings this year if they were in person. So this really works well for me.
Debbie?
There's pros and cons to both. I probably would have missed a couple also if I hadn't been able to do it virtually. And but it's also really nice to be with everybody and see people in person. I definitely vote for the December one to be in person.
I'll make sure of that. Andy?
I'm an advocate of the virtual meetings because I expect to be traveling a fair bit and benefit from being able to be a participant.
Rita?
Well, I feel like Debbie and Duncan, absolutely. It's a benefit to have more people view this, and be recorded and everything. But I'm a people person. I miss seeing everybody in person. So I would love to start up again in January with an in-person meeting in addition to the holiday party. Thank you.
Mike?
I think I'm in line with Frida and Debbie here. I have 2 school-age children, so virtual is great for me personally. But I think that a lot of the things that we capitalized in this during the pandemic. Oh no, what happened? A lot of things that we capitalized in this pandemic was that Debbie and I were able to have conversations over time, either before or after meetings. And then that led us to have a relationship that we could work together on what things we both needed support-wise from the government in the pandemic. And I don't think there's a trade-off. There's nothing that virtual offers that doesn't allow that benefits us as much as being, walking out of the room together and saying, hey, how are things? How was the weather this summer? I would prefer to be in person over virtual.
So, and I see benefits on both sides. I tend to think we seem to have had better attendance by the luxury of virtual, but on the other hand, I do miss the personal interaction. Maybe the thing I should do, well, let's keep November virtual, because what I want to do is I will talk to, and maybe Josh can tell me, tonight. If we met in person, Josh, at Truxton, is there a method there to stream that like they do in City Hall, or is that only a function of being able to be in City Hall or virtually?
I will have to check with Mark on that one, Mr. Chair. We can get back to you on that.
Would you
pretty
get back to
soon.
me? Because if we could stream the meeting from Truxton, that would alleviate the problem or the perception of opening it up to more people, because they would view it just like they're viewing it right now. On the other hand, it does create but I don't know whether we could do that as well as have members come in virtually, because it would mean basically laptops or something. So yeah, if you could just check or have the right person, somebody call me to talk about what the options might be, and then I'll report back in November, and then we'll plan on I will ask everybody to think about where we might want to meet in person in December, and we can decide that in November. And Mike, you have your hand up.
Is that what Ross is doing with his town halls? I mean, Ross has been hosting town halls, and I think they've been going out live on city TV. Is that?
Yeah. I don't know how that's been. I know he had an in-person one scheduled at the firehouse, and then it went virtual instead. So again, it sounds to me, I mean, it can be doable. It's just a question of the logistics. Frida?
So the Eastport Civic Association, we had a candidates forum at the fire hall, and we paid a millennial to live stream it on Facebook. So that was a way for the public to be involved. If they didn't want to be there in person, they were able to follow and ask questions that way.
And it was interactive, so they could ask questions?
Yeah, in the chat feature, you can ask questions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, using the chat feature.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we do that on, well, I use Zoom, so that's the way to do it on Zoom. You have people watching from the exterior. All right, well, yes, Debbie.
I just want to say that I won't be here virtually or otherwise in November because I will be on a plane coming back from cruising in Tahiti.
So you're finally going to get to do it.
Well, this is attempt 3, so hopefully it'll work.
I know. I talk to Dick from time to time, and every time, and I talk to him when I just canceled the next one,
What a wonderful trip. Good for you.
That's it's a long plane ride.
Yeah, I know.
But usually, well, I don't know. You better make sure they're not back to serving wine now.
They will be.
All right. Anybody else? Yes, Scott.
We are running at North Sales, running combo at a conference room and virtual, and it works pretty well. You can take a laptop and it can be the camera, and then plug the laptop into a large screen TV in the background in the conference room and have some virtual and some there, and it works pretty well. It's fairly simple. Doesn't need much high-tech stuff, but I'd recommend maybe looking at that. And personally, I'm going to be missing 2 or 3 meetings in the spring otherwise. That could be done virtually, partially virtually, but it works pretty well. You can have a conference table, put the laptop at the end, plug it with a cable up to a larger screen on the wall or something. And there's ways to do it fairly simply without getting a bunch of video people involved in it. If it's a city hall, it's a different story,
Yeah,
obviously.
I think because we are a city board, I think it has to run through the city with whatever their protocols.
Sure, I mean, you could do that too.
Just instead of Zoom bombing and everything else. So I think I'll let Josh just have somebody reach out to me, or he can reach out to me between now and our November meeting, see what our options are.
Sure.
And then go from there. I don't think I want to try it for our December meeting.
No, I'd vote for an in-person December meeting. But it's not too hard to make one of these combination.
Yeah,
and have the city be in on it too.
Certainly,
so.
it's not something that is going to be new to the technology world after 18 months of COVID. All right, anybody else?
Terry, if you need a spot for our December, we can certainly do it at Port Annapolis again if you'd like.
That is always a lovely option, and we will, anybody else have any suggestions, you can, we'll have this discussion in November and make a decision. But thank you, that's good to have that there again. All right, is there a motion to adjourn? If I'm gonna say, if I couldn't get a motion to adjourn, this is gonna be tough. Miss Goslin was first with her hand, Mr. Trogdon seconded, and all in favor.
Aye.
Thank you all, everybody. I know this whole task force endeavor has been a long and sometimes contentious, sometimes not so contentious.